The Scream in Anderson's Woods, a true Northern Michigan story. November 15th, 1982. This story is true. At least everything I'm about to tell you actually happened. What made the scream? That's the part I still can't tell you. It was November 15th, 1982, opening morning of deer season in northern Michigan. I was 12 years old. Back then, the country around Northport, Michigan was very different. There were cabins and cottages sparsely scattered along the shoreline and old cherry farms running across the countryside. It wasn't like today, when nearly every inch of shoreline seems spoken for and mansions appear along country roads that once led through nothing but orchards and woods. Northport was still more of a little fishing town than the vacation destination it would eventually become. There were stretches of untouched woods, long before some of them became state parks. And to a 12-year-old kid, those woods seemed enormous. That morning, my father, my 16-year-old brother, and I headed out before daylight in our country squire station wagon. My dad was 47 years old, and to 12-year-old me, he was an imposing figure. He was a powerful man, a good man, and a great father. He was also an Army veteran, a man who had already accumulated his own share of experiences in life. He carried a Remington Model 1100 automatic 12-gauge shotgun. I was still too young to carry a gun, but that didn't matter. Walking behind my father, I felt completely safe. As long as Dad was in front of me, there wasn't much in those woods that I thought I needed to worry about. We first dropped my 16-year-old brother off near a dark, swampy patch of woods by Woolsey Airport. I still remember watching him walk away from the station wagon. Within seconds, the darkness swallowed him. It was like watching someone walk into a jar of black ink. Then Dad and I drove about a mile away to a place our family called Anderson's Woods. We parked the country squire and started walking down an old 2-track trail we called the Cut Through. It was pitch black, no moonlight, and cold. I can still remember breathing through my nose and feeling the moisture beginning to freeze right at the entrance of my nostrils. And I remember the smell. Cold air mixed with pine. If you've spent a November morning in northern Michigan, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I walked directly behind my dad, and when I say directly behind him, I mean directly behind him. I was so close we were practically touching. Dad would joke about that for years afterward. We walked maybe a quarter mile down the cut-through. Today, a quarter mile doesn't sound like much, but when you're 12 years old, walking through an absolutely black forest where you can't see what's 20 feet in front of you, it feels like you've walked a very long way. Eventually, Dad stopped. He didn't say anything. He just motioned for me to stop too, and we waited. The woods were completely still. Slowly, our eyes began adjusting. The first gray morning light was starting to work its way through the trees. And then, it screamed. I have never forgotten that sound. It was one single, god-awful scream. The closest description I can give is something terrible. It sounded like a woman being attacked. But what frightened me almost as much as the scream itself was its power. It didn't seem to come from one particular tree or one particular direction. It seemed to inundate the entire woods. For that instant, it felt as though the forest itself had screamed. My father's reaction was immediate. The Remington 1100 came up into a ready position, and simultaneously I heard a tiny mechanical sound that I remember almost as clearly as the scream. Click. Dad had taken the safety off, and 12-year-old me responded with an equally sophisticated tactical maneuver. I somehow managed to get even closer behind him. I think for several seconds my father and I were occupying approximately the same physical space. Then we waited. Dad watched the woods. I watched Dad. Nothing. No second scream, no crashing through the brush, no footsteps, no animal running away, nothing appeared between the trees. Just silence. Eventually morning arrived, and nothing else happened. But neither one of us ever forgot it. Over the years we tried to explain it. Maybe it was a deer in distress. Deer can make some surprisingly horrible sounds. Maybe a rabbit being caught by a predator. Maybe a fox. A red fox can produce an incredibly human-sounding scream. And there's another animal found in northern Michigan capable of making a sound that can make the hair stand up on your neck. A bobcat. Bobcats can produce remarkably loud, eerie screams that people sometimes mistake for a woman or child screaming in the woods. If you forced me today to give the most reasonable explanation for what Dad and I heard that morning, I'd probably say bobcat. But there's one little complication. My father had another story, actually two of them. Dad loved driving those back roads around Northport, and in the years that followed, he occasionally told us that he had seen something considerably larger than a bobcat, not a cougar. At least that wasn't how Dad described it. He said it was a cat-like animal, large, much larger than he expected any cat in northern Michigan to be, and exceptionally dark, black or nearly black. He only saw it for an instant. Once, according to Dad, he saw this animal near Woolsey Airport, about a mile from Anderson's woods, about a mile from where we heard that scream. Another time, he claimed to have seen something similar near Peterson Park. Whenever Dad told those stories, there was always a little friendly skepticism from the rest of us. Maybe he saw a big dog. Maybe it was a bobcat and distance fooled him. Maybe the darkness made the animal look larger than it really was. Maybe it was something else. Or maybe Dad saw exactly what he said he saw. A large, extremely dark, cat-like animal moving through the woods of northern Leelanau County. And that raises another possibility. Mountain lions are capable of producing screams that sound frighteningly human. Cougars were considered essentially gone from Michigan at the time. But if one was moving through northern Leelanau County in 1982, a scream like the one we heard would suddenly have a very ordinary explanation. So maybe the mystery of Anderson's woods isn't much of a mystery at all. Maybe there really was a mountain lion roaming those woods. Maybe Dad's dark cat-like animal had nothing whatsoever to do with the scream. Or maybe it was simply a bobcat whose voice carried perfectly through a frozen November forest. That's probably where the story should end. Except this is northern Michigan. And if you've spent enough time sitting around family campfires or in little northern Michigan taverns, you already know there's always somebody willing to offer one more explanation. Bigfoot. And because this is Michigan, the Dogman. Now, am I telling you that a 7-foot hairy creature, or some half-man, half-wolf monster, was standing somewhere in Anderson's woods watching a 12-year-old boy and his father that morning? No. We never saw anything. We never found tracks. Nothing chased us. Nothing happened afterward. And 44 years later, I still think an ordinary Michigan animal is overwhelmingly more likely. But I also know what I heard. And more importantly, my father heard it too. Dad wasn't a frightened 12-year-old kid. He was a 47-year-old Army veteran and experienced hunter, a man who had already seen enough in his life that a strange noise in the woods wasn't likely to send him into a panic. And that scream surprised him enough that in one motion he raised his Remington and clicked off the safety. Years later, he admitted that the sound startled him too. That's the part I've always remembered. Dad is gone now. But the story isn't. My brothers and I have replayed it countless times over the years, around family campfires, in local taverns, sitting around telling stories about deer season and the old days around Northport. And inevitably someone brings up that morning, what the hell screamed in Anderson's woods? Bobcat? Fox? A deer? A mountain lion that supposedly wasn't there? Whatever that big black cat-like animal was that Dad claimed to have seen? Bigfoot? The Michigan Dogman? I'll probably never know. But every November 15th, if I think about it long enough, I can put myself right back there. 12 years old. Pitch black northern Michigan woods. Cold air freezing against my nostrils. The smell of pine. Walking so close behind my father that I could practically touch him. Then that horrible scream filling the forest. The Remington coming up. Click. And me moving right behind Dad. Because whatever was somewhere out there in the darkness had to get through him first.